Let me tell you something that I wish someone had told me 20 years ago when I first started studying how women's bodies change after menopause. Because what I'm going to share with you today is something that most women never hear, not from their GP, not from the pharmacist who hands them a bottle of calcium tablets, and certainly not from the supplement companies who are making a very healthy profit from your very real concern about your bones. I'm Margaret Claire. I've spent 22 years at the University of Edinburgh researching female longevity, specifically what happens to a woman's body in the decades after menopause, and how we can use that knowledge to age not just longer, but genuinely better. I am not a doctor. I want to be clear about that. I am a scientist and an educator, and everything I share with you is grounded in peer-reviewed research. My job is to translate that research into something you can actually use in your daily life. And today, we are talking about calcium. Specifically, we are talking about the mistake that I see over and over again. A mistake that is being made by the vast majority of women over 60, women who are doing everything right, who are trying to take care of their bones, who are genuinely worried about osteoporosis. And I understand that worry completely. After menopause, bone mineral density can decline faster than at almost any other point in a woman's life. That is a real physiological reality. Estrogen plays a critical role in bone remodeling. It helps slow down the cells that break bone down. And when estrogen drops, that protective effect diminishes. So yes, your bones deserve attention. Yes, this is something you should be actively thinking about. But the calcium mistake I'm going to describe today is actually making things worse for many of the women who are trying to fix the problem. So let me start with the foundation, because before we even get to calcium, I need to say something that I consider non-negotiable. If you are not doing resistance-based weight-bearing exercise at least 2 to 3 times per week, then no supplement in the world is going to give you the bone protection you are looking for. I say this not to make anyone feel guilty, but because bones respond to mechanical load. When you put weight through your skeleton, whether that is your own body weight, dumbbells, resistance bands, or anything else that creates that loading stimulus, your body sends a signal to build more bone. That is how bone formation works. It is a mechanical process as much as it is a nutritional one. So please, if you take nothing else from this video, take that. Movement is medicine for your bones in a way that nothing you swallow can replicate. Now, with that said, let's talk about calcium. Here is what most women in their 60s have been told. As you age, your bones thin. You need more calcium, take a supplement. It sounds simple, it sounds sensible, and in many respects, it is well-intentioned advice. But the picture is considerably more complicated than that, and some of the ways women are currently supplementing calcium are actually creating new risks while attempting to address an old one. The research on high-dose calcium supplementation, particularly calcium taken in large amounts in supplement form, has raised some genuinely concerning findings. And I want to walk you through what the science is telling us, because I think once you understand the mechanism, the recommendations I'm going to share will make a lot more sense. When you take in more calcium than your body can actually process and absorb at a given time, that excess calcium has to go somewhere. Your kidneys work to filter it out, which is why high calcium intake, particularly from supplements, has been associated with an elevated risk of kidney stones in some women. That alone is worth paying attention to. But the finding that I think deserves far more attention than it receives is what happens to excess calcium in the bloodstream. Under certain conditions, particularly when the cofactors needed to properly direct calcium into bone are insufficient, calcium can begin to deposit in soft tissue, including the walls of arteries. This process, called vascular calcification, is associated with cardiovascular stiffness and elevated risk of heart disease. And here is why that matters so particularly for the women I'm speaking to right now. After menopause, cardiovascular disease becomes the leading cause of death for women. Heart disease is not just a man's problem. It is disproportionately deadly for postmenopausal women, in large part because estrogen's protective effects on the cardiovascular system are no longer present. So the last thing any of us wants to be doing is unknowingly contributing to arterial calcification while trying to protect our bones. Now, I want to be very precise here because I am not saying that calcium is harmful. I am not saying do not supplement. What I am saying is that the dose, the form, the timing, and the cofactors around calcium intake matter enormously. and most supplement labels do not give you any of that context. Let me talk about dosage first, because this is where the most common mistake happens. Your body has a ceiling for how much calcium it can meaningfully absorb at one time. Research consistently puts that ceiling at around 500 milligrams per sitting. Some studies are slightly more generous, but 500 to 600 milligrams is a reasonable upper boundary for a single dose. Beyond that threshold, absorption does not continue to climb. Instead, the excess circulates and creates the risks I just described. Now, here is the problem. Many calcium supplements on the market, including widely available bone health formulas and even standard multivitamins, contain 700, 800, even 1,000 milligrams of calcium in a single tablet. Women are taking these once or twice a day, sometimes alongside a separate multivitamin that also contains calcium, sometimes alongside a fortified plant-based milk that adds another 300 milligrams. And suddenly, without realizing it, you are well above any safe or beneficial intake range. This is not a failure of intention, it is a failure of information. And the supplement industry, which in most countries operates with very limited regulatory oversight, has very little financial incentive to tell you to take less of their product. So the first thing I want you to do after watching this video is go through every supplement you are currently taking, every single one, and add up the calcium content. Read the labels carefully, because calcium appears in various forms: calcium carbonate, calcium citrate, calcium phosphate. Add them all together. If your total supplemental calcium in a single sitting exceeds 500 to 600 milligrams, I would encourage you to speak to a healthcare provider about adjusting your intake. Now let's talk about why it is not just the amount of calcium that matters. It is what calcium needs in order to actually reach your bones rather than your arteries. And this is the part of the conversation that is almost never had. Calcium is not a lone operator. It works within a system. And the two most critical partners in that system are vitamin D3 and vitamin K2. Let me explain what each of these does, because together they form what I think of as the calcium guidance system. Vitamin D3 is responsible for calcium absorption in the gut. Without adequate levels of vitamin D3, you can be eating and supplementing calcium all day long and absorbing very little of it. Many women over 60 are deficient in vitamin D3, particularly in northern latitudes where sun exposure is limited for large portions of the year. If you are deficient in vitamin D3, the calcium you consume largely passes through you. Or worse, it gets absorbed into the bloodstream without the proper signals to direct it toward bone. This is one reason why some research on calcium supplementation alone has shown disappointing results on bone density, because the cofactors were not in place. Vitamin K2, and I want to be specific here because K1 and K2 are quite different in their functions. K2 activates a protein called osteocalcin, which is responsible for binding calcium into the bone matrix. Think of K2 as the signpost that tells calcium where to go. Without sufficient K2, calcium that has been absorbed into the bloodstream does not get properly routed into bone tissue. And crucially, research suggests that K2 also activates a protein called matrix GLA protein, or MGP, which actively inhibits calcium from being deposited in arterial walls. So K2 is doing two things simultaneously. It is helping calcium get into your bones, and it is helping keep calcium out of your arteries. That is an extraordinarily important nutrient for postmenopausal women, and one that is almost never discussed in mainstream calcium conversations. Magnesium is a third cofactor worth mentioning. Roughly half of the body's magnesium is stored in bone, and magnesium is required for the conversion of vitamin D into its active form. Many women over 60 are functionally low in magnesium, partly because of dietary patterns, partly because certain medications deplete it, and partly because absorption can decline with age. If you are deficient in magnesium, your vitamin D is not being properly activated, which means your calcium absorption is impaired, which means the entire system begins to break down. So when I talk about bone health for postmenopausal women, I am not talking about calcium in isolation. I am talking about a system: calcium, D3, K2, magnesium. These four work together, and optimizing one without attending to the others is like trying to run a car on one of its four wheels. Now let me give you a practical framework, something you can actually take away and work with. On the calcium side, my recommendation is food first, always. The calcium you obtain from whole food sources comes packaged with cofactors, phytonutrients, fiber, and other compounds that support absorption and overall metabolic health in ways that an isolated supplement simply cannot replicate. And for postmenopausal women specifically, emerging research suggests that dietary calcium, particularly from plant sources, may be associated with better bone density outcomes than equivalent amounts of supplemental calcium. There are several reasons for this. Plant-based calcium sources tend to be highly bioavailable. They come without the saturated fat load of dairy products, which matters because reducing saturated fat intake supports cardiovascular health, something that should be a priority for every woman past menopause. And plant foods bring an array of anti-inflammatory compounds that support the broader environment in which bone remodeling occurs. So let me walk you through the calcium-rich foods that I prioritize and give you a sense of the amounts we're talking about. Dark leafy greens are at the top of my list. Cooked spinach, collard greens, kale, bok choy, these are among the most bioavailable sources of dietary calcium available to us. 2 generous cups of cooked dark greens can contribute 300 milligrams or more of absorbable calcium, and they come alongside magnesium, vitamin K1, folate, and a range of antioxidants that actively support bone and cardiovascular health simultaneously. If you eat spinach regularly and you have concerns about oxalates, compounds that can in very large quantities interfere with mineral absorption, simply cook it. Lightly steaming or sautéing spinach significantly reduces its oxalate content while retaining its calcium. Unless you are consuming truly extraordinary quantities of raw spinach every day, oxalates in cooked greens are not a meaningful concern for most women. Calcium-set tofu is one of the most concentrated plant-based calcium sources available. When tofu is manufactured using calcium sulfate as the coagulant, which you can confirm by checking the ingredient list for calcium sulfate, a single cup can provide upwards of 700 milligrams of highly absorbable calcium. It is also a complete protein source, which is increasingly important as we age because muscle mass and bone mineral density are closely linked. You cannot effectively preserve or build bone without also preserving muscle. If you have never cooked with tofu before, or if the texture puts you off, I would encourage you to try extra firm or high protein varieties. They have a denser, more satisfying texture that lends itself beautifully to stir-fries, scrambles, and grain bowls. White beans and other legumes are an underappreciated source of calcium. Half a cup of cooked white beans provides approximately 130 milligrams of calcium alongside resistant starch, fiber, and plant-based protein. Kidney beans, chickpeas, and edamame are all solid contributors as well. If soy concerns you, and I know some women carry worries about soy and breast cancer or thyroid function, I want to reassure you that the most current and robust body of research has not only failed to support those concerns, but has in many cases found the opposite. Isoflavones in soy appear to have a protective effect against breast cancer recurrence, and for most women, moderate soy consumption is associated with reduced hot flashes and improved cardiovascular markers. Only a very small percentage of women have a genuine soy allergy. For the rest of us, soy foods are genuinely health-promoting. Figs, both fresh and dried, deserve a special mention because they are one of the most calcium-dense fruits available. 3 to 4 dried figs can provide 40 to 50 milligrams of calcium, and they are extraordinary for adding to oatmeal, smoothies, or trail mixes. If you can access fresh figs, even better. Prunes are often discussed in the context of bone health, and there is reasonable evidence supporting their benefit, but figs edge ahead in terms of raw calcium content. Almonds are another daily staple I recommend. A quarter cup of raw almonds provides roughly 80 milligrams of calcium, along with magnesium, vitamin E, and healthy fats that support anti-inflammatory pathways. A handful of almonds is one of the most convenient and nutrient-dense additions to any eating pattern. Chia seeds are remarkable. 1 tablespoon of chia seeds contributes approximately 175 milligrams of calcium, along with omega-3 fatty acids, which are important for reducing systemic inflammation. And inflammation, by the way, is one of the key drivers of accelerated bone loss in postmenopausal women. Add chia seeds to smoothies, to yogurt alternatives, to overnight oats. The amount is small, the nutritional contribution is significant. Whole oranges, not juice but the actual fruit, provide around 60 milligrams of calcium per orange, along with vitamin C, which is required for collagen synthesis. And collagen is not just something we associate with skin. It forms the protein matrix upon which calcium crystals are deposited in bone. Vitamin C deficiency is more common in older adults than is widely recognized, and ensuring adequate intake is a simple, low-effort way to support the structural framework of your skeleton. A realistic, varied daily food pattern drawing from these sources can consistently get you to 1,200 milligrams of calcium per day, which is the recommended intake for women over 50. That is entirely achievable through food, for most women, most of the time. Aim for that through diet first. Now, if your circumstances make it genuinely difficult to reach that level through food alone, whether because of dietary restrictions, travel, medical conditions affecting absorption, or simply the practical realities of your life, then supplementation has its place. But if you supplement, please do so thoughtfully. No more than 500 milligrams in a single dose. Take it with food, which improves absorption and reduces the risk of gastrointestinal discomfort. Do not take it at the same time as iron-containing supplements, as they compete for absorption. Calcium citrate is generally better absorbed than calcium carbonate, particularly if you have any reduction in stomach acid production, which becomes more common as we age. And pair that supplemental calcium with adequate D3, K2, and magnesium. These are not optional extras. They are structural requirements for calcium to do its job safely and effectively. For D3, most women over 60 who are not getting regular sun exposure benefit from supplementing 1,000 to 2,000 IU daily, though some individuals need more. A simple blood test can tell you where you stand. For K2, look for the MK7 form, which has the longest half-life in the body and the strongest evidence base. A typical dose is around 100 to 200 micrograms daily. For magnesium, 300 to 400 milligrams of magnesium glycinate or magnesium malate daily is well tolerated and supports sleep, muscle function, and the D3 to active D3 conversion I mentioned earlier. That combination, food-first calcium, moderate and well-timed supplementation if needed, paired with D3, K2, and magnesium, underpinned by consistent resistance-based exercise, is the framework that the research supports. It is not a quick fix. It is not a single pill. It is a system, and your bones are worth that level of care. One final thought before I close. I know that navigating all of this information can feel overwhelming. There is so much noise out there, so many products, so many conflicting claims. My hope is that what I share with you gives you clarity rather than anxiety. You have more agency over your bone health than you may have been led to believe. The choices you make at the supermarket, in your kitchen, in your exercise routine, they are not trivial. They are the variables that determine how your skeleton ages over the next decade and beyond. You are not a passive recipient of whatever biology decides to do. You are an active participant in this process, and I want to be here every time I post to give you the tools to participate as wisely and as effectively as possible. If this was helpful, please subscribe and make sure your notifications are turned on. I put a significant amount of time and research into each video, and I would hate for you to miss what's coming next. There is so much more I want to share with you about postmenopausal health, and we are just getting started. I will see you in the next one.